At age 12, Elon Musk, this guy here, coded a video game in a weekend and sold it, all while navigating family chaos and international moves. Man, I really suck at this game. Oh, my fleet has been destroyed. Now, since this is just for starters, from a man who has learned enough to found, co-found, and outright purchase multiple companies, the answer to the question, is Elon Musk a polymath, is absolutely yes. Although some people find Musk's learning to be enigmatic, I believe that there's a combination of scientific analysis and historical study that can clarify for us precisely how so much learning can take place in one person's life, including your life. Just as Leonardo da Vinci sketched flying machines while living in war-torn Italy, and Nikola Tesla imagined incredible inventions while facing a whole host of problems most of us never deal with, Musk has proven he can learn substantially, despite many challenges, using strategies. Strategies that we can understand. And it's not luck, it's not genetics, but the implementation of various procedures that lend themselves to learning. And there may be a little bit of luck here and there. But when we talk about strategies, I've got a bunch for you today, including an opportunity to get for free my new Polymathy Unleashed guide that will help you reach your learning and implementation goals based on these strategies that are very easy to understand and implement when you understand them. But first, let's address the white elephant in the room, or maybe it's a green elephant. I'm not sure what color the elephant is, but Elon Musk talks about crazy images in rooms when he talks about memory techniques, so we've got to talk about it. Because of course, like most innovators, Musk is divisive. He's loved by some and despised during certain political climates. But his polymathic accomplishments can teach us a lot, despite whatever you read in the latest headlines. So in this video, we're stripping away the noise to reveal lessons about learning from which anyone can benefit. So whether you're friend or foe, let's dive into the factors that will help you thrive as a learner, no matter what turbulence in life you face. I'm going to introduce as well a concept and a comparable figure you've likely never heard of before. So buckle up, my friends. You're about to learn what it really takes to develop mastery across multiple fields. But let's start by asking, what is a polymath anyway? And what is it that makes Elon Musk part of the Polymathy club? Well, actually, there is no club. And although there are aspects to consider that bind people together, such as a variety of polymath personality traits, nothing quite explains the ability to dream big and fulfill ambitious ideas other than the implementation, again, of strategy. So let's use first principles here and look at the term polymathy itself. And, some people will say, well, you're doing some sort of etymological fallacy. And no, I mean, words mean things, and that's why we use them. So in order to become a polymath, you really only need to do what other polymaths do, provided they qualify to be people of multiple learning. And that way, you can easily fulfill this definition. Being a person who learns various things to a certain level of satisfaction, which basically comes down to accomplishment, that's what it is. And to do this, you really want to go beyond the cliche definitions found elsewhere on the internet. You don't want to get stuck up in this idea that polymaths need to be intellectually open or they have to be super curious all the time. I mean, Walter Isaacson's biography of Musk shows very clearly that he is sometimes closed-minded to a variety of options. And this closed-mindedness has been a massive driver of Musk's success, even if sometimes very ironic ways. So this factor directly contradicts all kinds of things that you hear people talking about in terms of being open to challenge, and if anything, it's stripping away unnecessary challenges. That is one of the major things that Musk has learned to do and applied to great success.
Your requirements are definitely dumb. It does not matter who gave them to you. It's particularly dangerous if a smart person gave you the requirements, because you might not question them enough. No matter who you are, everyone's wrong some of the time. Then try very hard to delete the part or process. This is actually very important. If you're not occasionally adding things back in, you're not deleting enough. The bias tends to be very strongly towards, let's add this part or process step in case we need it. But you can basically make in-case arguments for so many things. Only the third step is simplify or optimize.
And, apart from that, Musk just ticks about every box that scientists who have studied polymathic skill have created. And the first is cognitive flexibility. Then you have creativity, which has been demonstrated in science to be something that anyone can train. You also have divergent thinking. You have many forms of critical thinking going on. You have high working memory capacity, which is something you can also, to a certain extent, improve through training. Then you have analogical reasoning skills. You have strategies for handling ambiguity and uncertainty. And you have intrinsic motivation, self-discipline, and mental strength, along with consistency. And consistency specifically in the mastery of accelerated learning techniques, which require practice, deliberate practice. And that gets you to a breadth and depth of learning that helps you with creative problem solving using what sometimes scientists call stochastic behavior. So I want to go a little bit deeper into this idea of stochastic behavior because it is something that reveals clues that will help you break out of learning ruts you might find yourself in. I use stochastic learning myself quite a bit. And in case you're new here and we don't know each other, this is Dr. Anthony Metivier from magneticmarymethod.com. I am inviting you to absolutely smash that thumbs up as if you were trying to launch a rocket to the moon or Mars or even beyond. And if you're new here and you cherish lots of new ways to think about learning and to improve your memory, get subscribed. This channel is filled with all kinds of tutorials that help you teach yourself, improve your memory, and enjoy a much better life as a result. And I'm going to, in the future, be doing more profiles of more polymathic people. Now, the only thing that I ask is, you be patient with my own stochastic behavior, which is a term that refers to introducing uncertainty on purpose. So here's a concrete example. Musk did reasonably well in school when it comes to mathematics, but he took an autodidactic approach to learning rocket science on his way to founding SpaceX. Rather than follow a linear and traditional path, he created his own self-education program. Now, that doesn't mean that he didn't learn without help from people who had formal training, but more than merely read books, he learned to fly, to help himself visualize aerodynamics better. And when it comes to the books that he read, he didn't rely on libraries alone. He picked up the phone and asked the best experts to lend him old engine manuals. And these are primary documents that not only show some of the basic foundational information, but also the history, the progress that, you probably couldn't have accessed any other way other than through libraries and asking the experts what to look for. And many of those books would have been deprecated, removed from libraries. So the point here is that this is the extra mile. And it is autodidactic in the sense of creating one's own program and adding these stochastic, chaotic elements. They seem chaotic to other people. Oh, you're going to go get a pilot's license now. But it leads to better mental rotation, which is a technique that we'll talk about later. There's also a stochastic or chaotic personal philosophy for learning, and Musk has this. He believes that progress is not inevitable. This is very, very important because taking certain actions make use of first-order thinking and get to results often faster and in ways that are more actionable, but not always, right? And because progress is not inevitable, you have to make mistakes as quickly as possible. You have to run the experiments in order to get the breadth and depth of learning that has helped Musk have better arguments and more persuasion in rooms where he has to converse deeply with the best experts in a variety of fields. Part of what I'm saying is meta level, but it's also just foundational. Some people see a person making erratic bets and acting irrationally. But when you think about it through stochastic learning, introducing chaos on purpose, it isn't irrational at all. Rather, Musk is deliberately making stochastic gambles in order to ensure new results lead to new learning. So you can think about this with several Falcon 1 failures and how they weren't just labeled as failures. They were studied. And without allowing for the unpredictable setbacks that were highly likely to happen, Musk and SpaceX would not have been able to refine their knowledge and establish what ultimately became a pattern of success. Now, riddle me this. Wouldn't you want to analyze a pattern of success and compare it against a pattern of failure for even more learning? Well, I would myself, and I do this myself, and I introduce various things that we can get into a different day in my own work to ensure that there's a bit of chaos. It drives some of my business mentors a little bit bonkers, but the reality is that there's method to the madness, because there are data points that I never get to see if I don't add a little bit of chaos from time to time. And, scientists have demonstrated that the brain is not able to generate the best creative solutions to problems without having the best possible data set to compare as many things as possible against, to open avenues of thought that are in darkness until that they actually have some light shone into the unknown. So with all that in mind, let's look at the top 8 skills that I believe Elon Musk demonstrates and that we can all learn from. And again, I'm going to give you an example that I think you'll find very, very surprising, but will help dimensionalize everything. Everything from mental resilience that's needed to deal with things like the near collapse of Tesla, and just personal issues, and as I mentioned, moving a lot when Musk was a kid and so forth. These are really, really fundamental. And when it comes to our focus on polymathy and the learning needed to become polymathic, so I've already dropped the first into the mix, which is first principles thinking. And it's a form of problem solving that involves breaking complex issues down to their most basic elements. And so Musk's experience with teaching himself a program like BASIC and then coding a game called Blastar, which you can still play using an HTML5 version in your browser, this required stripping things down using logical thinking. And using a Commodore VIC-20 with no formal training apart from completing BASIC's basic book and attending a conference that Musk's parents helped him attend, Musk is really, as I read the situation, asking a simple question. How can computer bits become a game? And a particular game, the kind of game he wanted to create. And he continues asking these questions throughout the career as it's presented in this book and in other materials that I consulted. He's asking first principle questions about rockets, about populating Mars, about electric cars, about boring tunnels, about the role of social media platforms. Now, I find social media platforms kind of boring, and I wish somebody would bore a hole into some of them so they would be more exciting, but that's a really bad joke, isn't it? In any case, clearly, not everyone agrees with or likes the answers to Musk's approach to first principles thinking.
First principles is kind of a physics way of looking at the world. And what that really means is you kind of boil things down to the most fundamental truths and say, okay, what are we sure is true, or as sure as possible is true? And then reason up from there.
But it produces particular kinds of answers, and some answers, even if they're stochastic, are better than no answers or answers that come from other forms of thinking. And we would do well to remember that many people didn't agree with lots of findings of other polymathic people. Richard Feynman's use of first principles raised umbrage when he was alive. Einstein and some of his ways of solving problems. So these movers and shakers, they used their skills with first principles thinking, and they shook things up and drove innovation, but not without ever avoiding drama, right? It's just part of it. So that's a reason to have a lot of mental strength and so forth, which you can use first principle thinking to think about how that you're going to feel the heat and push forward anyway. And you get a lot of clues about how Musk has done that through reading the biography. And really it comes down to a kind of mental attitude, which is that experiments must be run because progress is not inevitable. And so you move forward figuring out what is the number one way or the most logical way to keep the game going. Now, the second skill is interdisciplinary knowledge and the generation of knowledge so that it can be integrated. And the ability to fuse insights from multiple fields is priceless. And although much of Musk's learning comes from autodidactic programs that he created for himself, he has a dual major in physics and economics, which I believe was from University of Pennsylvania. This blended, and this is very important, it blended hard science with business. Now, I personally think that business is also a science, or at least you can treat it that way. And so they're not totally one is an art and a craft and not a science. They're both sciences in their way. But according to Isaacson's biography, Musk fused them in interesting ways by writing papers on solar power and ultra capacitors, and he continued fusing fields while interning at places like Pinnacle Research Institute. Combined, these experiences helped fuel, if you'll forgive the pun, the development of Tesla's energy software, amongst other things. So it's really, really important. And you want to think in your own life, like, how could I bring together multiple fields, and maybe they're not sciences as such, but how could you think about them scientifically? Because I think if you really analyze how Musk has made various business decisions, he is also treating the economy with a scientific mind and a first principles thinking mind, but also generally thinking of markets as fields or laboratories in which you can run experiments. And there's a lot of nuance I could bring to that, but generally I would tend to think personally, and I did when I did my PhD, I argued that cinema or the movie industry is a kind of economic laboratory in which people say, hey, we think this movie is going to work on the market, and the movie is itself the experiment that helps produce the data that either confirms or denies their hypothetical statements through the form of screenplays and actually shooting the films and so forth. So some people wouldn't agree with that necessarily, but I think that economics is the study of people running experiments with the economy. And there's various political movements that seem quite experimental too, if you think about it. Next, we want to talk about Musk's mastery of memory techniques.
The third way would be absurdity. So if you want to remember an event, try to imagine that event associated with something completely absurd. So like,
for you to remember it.
Yes.
Okay.
Wait.
That makes a lot of sense.
So like, let's say you want to picture this event in this room.
Mm-hmm.
Just like imagine a dancing elephant dressed in a tutu that's just dancing around the room. And then visualize that, and you will remember.
Now this excites me tremendously because in a number of interviews, Elon Musk talks about his use of a variety of mnemonic techniques. And that's what I do in the magnetic memory method world. I teach this. Now, I couldn't find in my research exactly when Musk first discovered mnemonics, but based on interviews with him, he clearly knows what they are and how to use them. It probably came across his radar when he was quite young. As his mother, Mae Musk, says in her book, A Woman Makes a Plan, she says, we called Elon the Encyclopedia because he had read the Encyclopedia Britannica and Collier's Encyclopedia and remembered everything. That's also why we called him Genius Boy. We could ask him anything. Remember, this was before the internet. I guess now we would call him the Internet. That's very, very interesting because part of what people do in mental rotation and mental imagery, which we'll talk about later, is create metaphors like that. So calling a human an encyclopedia and then later updating that to calling them the internet shows how you can use various metaphors in order to push various narratives forward and help explain to each other how things were. And whether or not he had such perfect recitation of encyclopedias or not, I don't know, but his description of the basics of mnemonic techniques that he uses in this interview clip, they're basically what you do, as far as I understand, after having studied memory techniques for decades.
In order for your brain to remember something, you have to establish relevance. You have to say why.
It's got to be in your head multiple
Yeah, it's
times.
like either
Not
why
exact, but-
or a strong emotional event,
Mhm.
like a strong involuntary emotional event, or you could I guess try to generate an emotion. And then the third way would be absurdity. So if you want to remember an event, try to imagine that event associated with something completely absurd. So
for you to remember it.
Yes.
Okay.
Wait.
That makes a lot of sense.
Let's say you want to picture this event in this room.
Mm-hmm.
Just like imagine a dancing elephant dressed in a tutu that's just dancing around the room.
Now, technically, in that clip, Musk is referring to techniques that are called the memory palace And he's talking about the pegword method, elaborative encoding, the chunking memory strategy. And if you want to know more about those things, I have videos throughout this channel that take deep dives in exactly how those techniques work. But the idea being is you associate information in a room with wild and crazy and strange images. And I've used Musk a few times as an association in my own memory palaces because in Latin, amamus, right? And so I use Musk for amamus, and that helps me clarify it from ama, amat, amant. So it's really, really powerful to use these techniques. And Musk's memory is at the core of his ability to challenge engineers in a variety of fields. He knows his stuff. He doesn't have to go and look at a phone or get a textbook or so forth. He can talk to them in real time. That kind of knowledge, although it may be possible without using memory techniques, I think is quite unlikely. The use of memory techniques has been profound, and it is a polymathic skill. The next skill is relentless research, but more, reflecting on the research. Memory techniques are great. I use them all the time myself, but they're not going to do nearly as much as they could for you without combining research, memorization, and then reflective thinking. Introspection is key as part of reflective thinking, and everyone can take a huge lesson from one episode in Musk's biography that I think is worth highlighting. After moving to Canada at one point, Musk worked all kinds of odd jobs, and in one case, he cleaned boilers in what sounds like an extremely risky environment. Nonetheless, Musk used the opportunity to reflect on energy systems. But think about this. How often do we find ourselves in jobs that we don't like, but we're just whinging on about them? We're whining, we're crying, we're complaining. Instead of directing our thoughts at positive solutions to big problems and mentally relating the things that we want to achieve to the current situation, well, the lesson here is simple. No matter what situation you find yourself in, keep your mind focused on solutions and use what you have in your vicinity to help your thinking move forward. The ability to direct your thoughts away from problems and towards solutions is a skill, one that can be developed and practiced through deliberate practice, and it can be something that you just start doing based on your situation as it is right now. So I don't know what your situation is, but think about that, reflect on it, and you will find interesting angles that you probably haven't considered before merely by doing what we're going to talk about next, which is mentally rotating the situation and using a special kind of visualization. As we know from studies in mental imagery, it's difficult to assess how other people visualize. In fact, there's still no consensus on exactly how to define visualization. Nonetheless, Musk, like Einstein, seems to go through a process of what you could call mental rotation. For example, Musk came up with the Boring Company after creating the mental image that cities are dominated by two-dimensional streets. And this led him to conceiving the notion of making city traffic three-dimensional. What many people don't add to the equation is that Musk's visualization emerged from spending a lot of time in traffic. He was in the field where the problems existed. I already talked about this, but similarly, he learned to fly, and this helped him visualize the first principles needed to improve rocket development and deployment. And you can tie this back to Einstein's use of trains in his thought experiments that helped demonstrate principles related to his theory of relativity. And the common use of trains during his era almost certainly shaped Einstein's choice of mental image. Had he been stuck in traffic on contemporary roads, perhaps in a Tesla, or maybe if he was a frequent flyer, Einstein might have used those forms of transport instead to work out his theory of relativity. And, if Elon Musk's mom had lived in the time of radio, she might have thought of Elon Musk as a human radio or something like that. The point is that the metaphors that we use are a product of the environment that we're in. And that's why we want to use that principle we talked about before of reflecting on the environment you're in and thinking about the kind of metaphors that it provides you with naturally, and then thinking about how you can use them as they are or brush them aside and find greener pastures of mental visualization. Now let's say a little bit more about mental rotation, because this can involve mentally inspecting an object from all angles, or, as Musk has shown over and over and over again, he's very hands-on. When stripping away unnecessary robots from Tesla's factory, for example, he literally sealed windows himself to determine whether that task would be more efficiently performed by people or by robots. And as he put it, after doing this test, humans are underrated, and so the robots left the game. So it's not just about mental rotation, but it's also about the hands-on application of testing the ideas that you have in your mind. Finally, when it comes to this idea of mental rotation and visualization, Musk uses a lot of metaphors like the algorithm. Now, it's not really an algorithm in the standard sense, but it is a mental rotational list of rules and what Isaacson calls in this book corollaries. And there's a whole list of them, but one of the most important involves a prompt to imagine the proper role of placing conditions upon progress. And the rule states that the only rules are the ones dictated by the laws of physics. Everything else is a recommendation. So this is a very, very interesting way of thinking about things, and you can mentally rotate just using that one principle through all the laws of physics that you're aware of. And it will be a brilliant strategy if you're developing as a polymath in fields involving design, technology, and just about everything you could imagine. The laws of physics may even be shown to apply to memory itself in the end. And here is where mental metaphors can be useful, even if there's a little bit of woo-woo, let's say. I mean, I don't know if it's woo-woo or not, because I don't understand physics enough to judge it. But some people consider this idea I'm about to mention fringe. It's something that Sir Roger Penrose has proposed, not on his own, but he's generally the public face of it. And it's called orchestrated objective reduction. And I had to use a memory technique to memorize that. It's a concept that stretches my ability to mentally rotate and visualize to the nth degree, and it probably will do that to yours as well. But the point is that rather than using a metaphor that we already have, it's pushing the limits into new areas of thought and cognition that get into paradoxes and things like the Hemingway paradox and so forth. So if you're interested in not just applying the laws of physics and everything else as a recommendation, well, what about the speculative laws of physics that haven't been fully fleshed out yet or demonstrated or validated through tests? Well, Roger Penrose, for his orchestrated objective reduction, he actually has an idea about how to use a satellite in order to test that concept. And so that requires something that is another skill that we'll talk about next. And for lack of a better term, I'm going to call that skill teleological pataphysics. Now, just as Musk believes that technological progress is not inevitable, he also assumes that human consciousness is under constant threat of extinction. Our survival, or the survival of how we tick mentally, is not guaranteed. And for this reason, Musk works really hard on developing rockets that will help us become an interplanetary species, and AI tools like Grok to help ensure alignment and compliance. You can criticize these things to the sun, but that's the point. If we don't get past the heat death of the sun, all this criticism will just be useless nattering, right? So in other words, Musk is making the effort to imagine the end game, which is teleological thinking, and solutions that potentially prevent an end to human consciousness taking place at all. Now, if you'll allow me to mash together two terms that illustrate my own polymathic efforts, I'm going to say it. I mean, I think Musk is a teleological pataphysicist. I know some of you are thinking, huh? Well, stick with me, and I'll explain this strange term. In a general way, teleological thinking refers to considering the ends of things, telos, such as the end of a goal or the result of a process. And by imagining the possibility of human consciousness flourishing, or at least existing forever, Musk is engaged in this teleological thinking. And pataphysics, it's a big topic, but I mean it in the sense of imaginary solutions in response to imaginary problems. And in this case, imaginary does not mean fake or anything less than real. Your brain and its neurochemicals are real, or at least I take them to be real. And if they are real, that means that your ideas are inherently material. They are electrically encoded in the nodes of Ranvier and all these wonderfully named parts of your brain. So when people imagine problems and imagine solutions to those problems, they are engaged in finding imaginary solutions to problems that are in the imagination. We don't actually know that the world comes to an end. We have every reason to believe that it will, but we don't really know. We don't even really know what infinity is, or at least I don't know what it is, and I've read many books where people argue about different definitions, different kinds of infinity. And so there are many products that we now know that come from people speculating about what might be possible, but that they didn't know how to make. And we use them all the time. They come from a kind of pataphysical thinking. When people imagined tablets and communicators for the Star Trek television series, they didn't imagine themselves fusing together the modern cell phone at that time, but they imagined the possible solution to problems that we would have in the future. And you got to ask yourself, would we as a species have been inspired and enabled to create the phones and tablets that we have today without imagining them first in fiction? I don't know the answer to that for sure, but I think the philosophical question is worth asking when we think about the skill of imagining solutions to problems, and especially when we consider the following interesting comparative example that I hope will make this thinking as a polymathic skill much more clear to you. And I think of this person as Musk's most interesting contemporary polymath that I'm aware of. Christian Book is a polymathic poet with a vast scholarly and artistic background, amongst other skills, and like Musk, he puts part of his talents to use by working to help human consciousness, or an aspect of it, survive the death of our sun. And in Book's case, he has worked on getting human consciousness into space via the Xenotext project. This is Book 1, and I'm very, very excited that Book 2 is coming out soon. And as part of the Xenotext project, Book has literally placed poetry inside of a deathless bacterium called Deinococcus radiodurans. And if I understand the project correctly, this will eventually lead to an annihilation-proof poem, or maybe more than one poem, written by Book that will be sent into space. And it may even be a poem that can reproduce itself to create new poems. And so part of that is written up in the Xenotext Part 1, and I can't wait to figure out where the project is in Xenotext 2 when I'm able to go through the follow-up book. But just think about this. When we think about Elon Musk's rockets, and we think about the thing that Sir Roger Penrose wants to do with orchestrated objective reduction, here we have another imagined solution to problems that are essentially imaginary. We just don't know what's going to happen. And the idea of sending poetry into space might sound outlandish, but it's not. It's pataphysical in the sense of an imaginary solution. And plus, sending poetry into space, it's already happened. The satellite, I think it's pronounced IRSAT-1, it carries a poem called All the Way Home. It was launched December 2023. And projects like these come about when people allow themselves to dream wildly and even absurdly, investing in integrating multiple disciplines, pushing through obstacles and barriers to the implementation of their goals, and getting things done that technically should be impossible. So when we think about people like this and Musk, the ability to dream absurdly big, whether it's the Hyperloop to establishing a colony on Mars, is not whimsy. And I'll tell you, if I ever wind up on Mars, I'm going to want the kind of books that Book writes, because they're amazing, and we don't want the same old boring stuff. We want the most exciting, imagined poetry that you could possibly ever think of, which is what teleological pataphysics is all about. It's not first principles thinking, it's end principles thinking, and it leads to all kinds of incredible art, incredible poetry, incredible science, incredible technological innovation. And exercising this kind of imagination is part of the open secret of genius. And Musk as I hope to have demonstrated for you, is far from being alone at thinking at massive scales like these. Also, you can consider the possibility of having microscopic scale and still having a massive impact. So it's not like you have to command these giant budgets or the kind of budgets needed to get scientists in laboratories to inject poetry into bacterium. You can do this kind of thinking and apply it at all kinds of scales, because the ultimate scale is seeing consciousness, witness the miracle of consciousness, and doing something about it, making sure that you enable yourself with every skill possible to take action, cut through the red tape, smash every obstacle, and do you want to look at it in the Stoic sense? Make the obstacle the way, including the Milky Way. The next skill we've got to cover is time management, and multiple sources describe Musk as being tough on employees, tough on his partners, and even by some accounts cruel in his epic quest for massive achievements. Isaacson lists multiple insults that Musk has cast, but let's put that aside to focus on the strategies that have allowed Musk and other people to maximize their learning. There are people on his team that have also applied these principles. So one of the things that Musk does is he splits his days between companies. And this scheduling itself must require a lot of cognitive shifting, a lot of cognitive ability, and you're not just going from business to business, but from discipline to discipline, category to category. There's a study that shows that the prefrontal cortex and the parietal regions of the brain experience high levels of activity when handling task-based decisions. And although Musk's habit of time blocking in his life in granular increments and holding regular meetings in a disciplined manner might seem rigid, what that study tells, I think, is a different kind of story. The quick problem solving and adaptability in some cases. I mean, there's some cases where there's less adaptability, as I mentioned. Well, when there's adaptability in play, this may stem from the strict time management habits, and that's worth considering. Now, of course, Musk has admitted to making many mistakes. And I mentioned time management because he's shown how he's learned to prioritize high-impact work early. You could consider this strategy of trying to get to the high-impact activities first, a kind of macro time management compared to the micro time management of daily meetings, and then some of the micro time management of, well, how can we get rid of this one robot to shave off 3 minutes, or whatever the case may be. And so you can think about time management in that way. What's the macro and what's the micro, and then what are some of the things in between? One of the other things to consider before we leave time management as a skill is the ability to practice planning as a practice itself, because things are going to happen and you're going to have to replan, and your skills with planning are going to come from not only practicing planning as itself a skill, but replanning on the fly as a skill and trying to see all the things that you're not seeing as quickly as possible, get as many viewpoints as you need to make a decision, and then make that decision even if that decision seems stochastic to others, chaotic, or actually is chaotic. And that's where the next skill comes in, which is installing feedback loops. Now, feedback loops are very much related to time management, and they need to be implemented with all kinds of projects. So you can consider how quickly Musk and his team dissect test failures. For example, following the SN8 explosion, they immediately adjusted their schedules to address the fixes. So it's constantly moving between iteration and analysis and then the next iteration. This keeps the projects moving quickly, and it doesn't always cut down the costs, but sometimes that quick motion leads to getting more data that can, in the end, lead to the need for fewer experiments, which ultimately cuts costs, even if in the short term it seems more expensive. Now, although other companies and individuals are not necessarily bogging themselves down by having prolonged deliberation, the proof here is in the pudding. Having a deliberate system for focusing on problems and prioritizing the discovery of solutions has led to clearly measurable, better results. And although many have criticized Musk's habit of working long hours, I suspect that it's actually the structure behind the time that he spends that does most of the heavy lifting, not the volume of the time. And, there is something to volume. I put in a lot of work at high volume. I can't stop myself. It's not necessarily a good thing, though. But I am making the suggestion that it's the structure and the deployment and the analysis that is doing the heavy lifting, just because I've seen it in my own little world of, teleological memory pataphysics, hoping to make sure that in the end people still cherish the memory that they have in case the power goes out and the robots don't help us remember anymore. So to that, I say again, thumbs up for the love of human memory. Now, when it comes to unlocking your polymathic constellation of skills, are you ready for Polymathy Unleashed? Either type up the destination on the screen or use the link in the description. You'll receive a powerful tutorial with a checklist that will help you expand your knowledge base as you pinpoint the passions that ignite your genius. And when you're not so passionate about certain skills that you have to adopt as a polymath, you have the gumption and the grit to keep moving forward, which is exactly what all the major polymaths I've studied do in one form or another. From integrating multiple disciplines to sharing signs of genius with people like Einstein and Christian Book, Musk exemplifies extensive research, memory mastery, and multiple types of visualization. As I've suggested, we should understand Musk through the lens of a teleological pataphysics. And I know this is a lesser-known concept, and partly I just made up that term based on other terms, but it places Musk very firmly in the company of other defiant rebels from the past. I'm thinking specifically of the Renaissance memory master Giordano Bruno. And that's not just random. Bruno took mental rotation so far that he completely repurposed Ramon Lull's memory wheels for both critical thinking and mnemonic purposes to help him remember better and solve problems faster. And as a result, Bruno was able to use his memory to envision infinity in ways that inspires and influences astronomers to this day. Now, Bruno was a little bit different than Musk, though. Bruno was fearless. Bruno was so fearless that he not only talked openly about how the Earth was not the center of the universe and that there were infinite planets and infinite suns, he ended up getting burned at the stake because he couldn't shut up about it. Well, Musk doesn't portray himself in a fearless way like that. As Bruno wound up saying to the Inquisition that sent him to the stake, "You fear your decision more than I do," because Bruno was convinced of his model of infinity and that everything would work out in the end. Musk has a skill which is calling things like it is, calling a spade, and when he's afraid, he admits it. As a philosophical thinker, Musk also allows for confronting ideas that are quite shocking to think about, like fatalism. And in other words, Musk feels the fear anyway, thinks through such ideas anyway, and this helps him shoot fear down and make informed leaps, not fearless ones. And this is really important. Sometimes we think about Kierkegaard and the leap of faith. Well, Kierkegaard has a lot of nuance on that leap of faith. He doesn't mean leap into nothing with faith. He means leap into a category and know that you're leaping into a category. Know that category is going to have dimensions and definitions, and you can use first principle thinking to work out what it's going to be. So the leap of faith is very, very different than the cliche version that a lot of people learn. It is not fearless, but it is made because there is the understanding that there's going to be thoughts to think. There's going to be mental rotation that can take place. And this is how many, many polymathic thinkers have been able to push themselves into scary learning adventures and feel the fear anyway. You don't have to cheer every move that you see Elon Musk take as he continues to travel the road of learning and implementation. But I hope that you've come to see how every barrier that we all bump into can be not only a call to adventure, but the way that we use to imagine things differently. And if you're willing to start small and work with materials that you have at hand, even if you're afraid, you can code games. We don't have to use BASIC anymore. You can just ask Grok to help you code the game. I did recently, and the game is fun, right? I used the tools at hand to learn, to iterate, to stress test, to figure out how to keep it moving forward, cut through the noise, even of my own objections. Oh, this is never going to work. Not sure what I'm doing wrong, but this is looking a little more interesting. And it worked. It made a product that I'm not going to offer anybody because it's just an experiment, but I learned so much from going forward using the tools at hand. It's not exactly the game that I imagined, but it's something that helps me now imagine better the process by which that I might get to that game. And, it's neither here nor there whether it's a polymathic skill, because I already knew a little bit about coding from when I was in high school. Not nearly as much as I should or could, but at the end of the day, again, it's the action that leads to analysis, and the analysis leads to light that is shot into the darkness so that the light expands and expands and expands, potentially expanding consciousness into the future without end. So if you would like help, make sure to get the new guide that I've created for you, and feel free to make full use of the material so you can rapidly develop better skills and better be able to remember the lessons that we talked about today and the lessons that we'll find in other polymaths that I'm going to profile in the future. So, what do you say? Are you ready to start taking just one of these tactics that we learned today and put it into action? I hope you test them all one at a time, a couple at a time, whatever works best for you in the turbulence of your own life, so you can transform the storms into triumph. And if you want to know more about how to become a polymath with greater immediacy, with greater speed, with greater consistency, check out my power tutorial on how to become an autodidact next. It will help you understand what an autodidact is, how that differs from polymathy, and why you need both. Thanks again for watching. Thanks for your thumbs up. And until we have a chance to speak again, watch that video, How to Become an Autodidact Next, and keep yourself magnetic.